Good afternoon, folks. It is lovely to see everybody here in the room. Thank you for joining us in person, and for those folks who are joining us virtually, thank you for making time through your day to join us for this panel. So the panel that you are at right now, just to make sure that you are in the right spot, is Changing the Narrative of Policing in the Campus Environment, Exploring Intentional Campus Health and Safety Collaborations. My name is Ida Balderrama Trudell. My pronouns are she, her, and I currently work as the Director of Student Engagement in the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the School of Education here at UW-Madison. I've been here for about 20 years in a variety of roles. Most of those roles put me in direct contact with students or student services on campus. And for the last 4 years, I've been a member of the Police Advisory Council, which brings me here today with my wonderful colleagues for this particular session. Just so you all know a little bit about how things are going to go today. So we have a moderator for our panel today. We've all been meeting and checking in about things that we wanted to share with you today. And our moderator will take us through some things that we would like to share related to our work and this topic. And then at the end, we will conclude for a few minutes of questions and a surprise reveal of some work that folks have been doing on the Police Advisory Council as well. So it's my pleasure to now introduce Dr. Nikki Smith-Key as our moderator. Thank you, Ida. It's on.
There we go. Modern technology, right? Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ida, for the warm welcome. As she said, my name is Nikki Smith-Key. I am currently an executive in residence with the Philadelphia Police Department and also a Stoneleaf Fellow. I was brought in to do to implement a number of reform efforts with the Philadelphia Police Department. I have been blessed, and I call it a blessing, to work with a number of law enforcement agencies across the country, one of which was the city of Madison. So for 4 years, I worked closely with the city of Madison at the intersection of law enforcement, mental health, substance use disorder, and homelessness. So it's good to be back here. On the flight, I heard about cheese curd, and I think 2 days ago was National Cheese Curd Day, so good for you all. Looking forward to this session, looking forward to sharing with you what we think will be very interesting and intriguing for you to, and we look forward to your questions as well. And I'll turn over to Andrew.
Thank you, Nikki. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Shaw. I'm a first-generation college graduate, and I'm currently pursuing my MBA at the Wisconsin School of Business. I also serve on the Police Advisory Council with a few other folks here. More about me, I am the son of a retired police officer, which led me to joining the PAC and providing what I believe is a unique perspective to some of the changes that we're trying to make.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nala McWhorter. I am a current senior here at UW-Madison, majoring in marketing. Last year, I was the president of the Wisconsin Black Student Union, and I also have been able to serve as a member of the Police Advisory Council. Also, a little bit about me. I am from Racine, Wisconsin. In a little context, we were previously named as the second worst city in the U.S. for Black people, and that's for like mass incarceration and poverty. So that's a little bit about where I come from and some of the work that I've done.
Thank you, Nala. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Dr. Louis Macias. He, him pronouns. I am the Executive Director for Recruitment, Diversity, and Inclusion at the UWPD. It is a new position that was created several years ago. We'll talk a little bit about that in the context of the session today. I've been at UW-Madison for about 7 years now, worked at our School of Business as well as our foundation before joining the PD back in 2019. So good to see you all and excited for our session today.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am Kristen Roman. I'm the Chief of Police and Associate Vice Chancellor for UWPD. I am wrapping up my 5th year in this position here at UW, and prior to that, I spent just shy of 27 years with the City of Madison Police Department, which is how I was able to connect and meet Nikki many years ago in the work that we were doing together at the city. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion, and I'm really thankful to be joined by all of the folks here, not just today for this discussion, but in the work that they've been doing with us and in the time that they've dedicated to collaborate with us on a number of different efforts through the Police Advisory Council.
Thank you, Chief. So we'll jump right into it. I think it's important for us to just have a roadmap of where we'll go today. So what we're hoping to do, broadly, we'll be talking about policing as a whole, because it's important that you understand the nuances of policing. I think we get up, we might dial 911, but we're not sure what happens on the other end. Just in terms of some facts, there are 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the United States, and that includes federal, state, local, and special jurisdictions. So your campus police would fit under that special jurisdictions. There are about 4,000 campus police and about 2,500 four-year college campus police. So I want to start with Chief, for you to just share with us some of the philosophies of UWPD and also talk about some of the values and how that drives practice.
Sure. So the philosophy of UWPD is really, it's rooted in the educational mission of the university. We recognize that the community that we serve is unique. We're all here, obviously, to facilitate the education of all of the students here, and that takes a whole lot. It takes faculty and staff across campus. So recognizing the unique population and community that we have here on campus, we understand that our role is to facilitate that education. So we really see ourselves and our role on campus as educators as well. We see ourselves as a part of the educational team. So we lead with education in the area of public safety. We lead first with education wherever possible. Our core values are certainly what ground us, and so the philosophy is grounded as well within our core values. And if you're not familiar with what those are, a lot of the information that we push out and a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today, I would encourage you to take a look at our website. There is a whole lot of information there. Again, a lot of which we'll be touching on briefly here today. And so our mission, our vision, our core values are all on our website. But if you haven't seen that, I'll tell you that it's more than just a convenient acronym. Our slogan, and you may have seen it on our squad cars, is reaching higher. And that higher is an acronym for our core values. But as I said, it's more than just a word. So those values are about honor and integrity and serving as guardians for our community, promoting health both inside our organization so that we can be of service in healthy ways outside of our organization, and treating people with empathy and respect. And so that is what grounds us and what really informs all of the work that we do. And if you come visit us at the PD, which I certainly welcome folks to stop in, and see, you'll see that this is something that is not just on paper, it's not just something that we pay lip service to. It really is something that we embrace and that shapes and guides our work every day. And last but not least, I would say that sort of I'm an English major, so I went to school here. A little bit about me. I was a student athlete here many years ago. And so as an English major, I like words and metaphors, and so the reaching higher is also a metaphor for our commitment to continuous improvement and assessment and evaluation. And so we keep looking for ways to reach higher, to move to that next level. And we do that through engagement, through listening to our community, to being responsive to our community. And we recognize that none of us can do this alone. And so this reaching higher is also sort of about climbing. And if you think about metaphors around climbing, if you're familiar with climbing as a sport, we use carabiners to attach to one another, right? And in order for us to get to that next level, we have to be supported by somebody to help us do that. And so these are all ideas that we talk about within the department. And as I said, I think that is what is somewhat unique about our police department. But I do think that campus policing overall really does move and engage with our community in ways that are models that I think many departments across the country can learn from.
Thank you, Chief. And I would encourage you to please go to the police department and really sit and talk with them and understand just all the amazing work that's being done on your campus police and with your campus police officers. Nala and Andrew, I'm going to turn over to you. In the last year and a half, we've had a traumatic experience, both with a pandemic as well as civil unrest. And we heard resounding calls for changing police. And we heard about defunding police or abolition of policing. And I wanted to really just not act as though this isn't happening. This is a conversation that's happening. Both Nala and Andrew, you're student leaders on campus. You have committed to changing the status quo, which I hear is encouraged on this campus. I have two questions for you. Andrew, as a member of the PAC, Nala, you were the president of the Wisconsin Black Students Union. So the two questions are, can you share some of your thoughts on the barriers to cultivating trust between police and communities, particularly communities of color? But I also want you to share with me what is needed to shift the narrative, to improve the relationship between policing and communities.
Yeah, I can start us off. I think one huge barrier to creating those relationships, to cultivating trust, is fear. And I think fear on both ends, right? Like fear, communities of color fear police because of the history of what's been happening the past summer we had. And I think the same is to be said on the other side. You know, a lot of times when you see unarmed Black people or people of color being killed, it's because the police feared. And so I think the first step is to definitely like eradicate that fear. And I think in order to do that, there has to be a relationship building. You know, we have to, like you said, work together. We have to collaborate. We have to have those tough conversations. And I think it's really important, as you kind of mentioned, that acknowledgement piece, like that this is happening. You know, we're not crazy. We're not just pulling this out of nowhere. Like these things are happening. Communities of color are being targeted. They are being affected. And I think in order to change the problem, you have to acknowledge there's a problem. So I think that is fear. Fear needs to be, you know, eradicated. And in order to shift that narrative, you definitely have to have those very tough conversations and sometimes those tough acknowledgments to get past that.
Great. Andrew?
Yeah, for sure. So, when it comes to following up on the events that occurred last summer and that need for change, coming from the business school, I'm looking at it from a business perspective. I think a framework that I look through or utilize is a change management framework. And I think that the department leadership, as well as some of the community stakeholders, with us being on the PAC, have completed that first step of the change management process, which is identifying the goals we want to achieve with the change. But now we're in the implementation stage of the change, and this is where the tires hit the road and we are confronted with many of those barriers. Like Nala had mentioned, you have the historical role that policing has played within BIPOC communities. Also, you have just personal lived experiences with us being people of color coming from all over the country. We bring this fear and expectations with us as we navigate throughout the UW campus. In addition to being with the campus police being compared to national police, the national policing narrative. Now some solutions that I think to kind of follow up with Nala is, yeah, the key thing is transparency and engagement, transparency of information, accessibility of information to kind of alleviate some of those barriers and reduce that fear on both sides. And I think that in achieving that, once achieving that, we need to analyze and process how things are being implemented and adjust accordingly to kind of tie into Chief's reaching for higher. You need to reiterate if you're seeing that things aren't being adopted appropriately.
Thank you both so much. You might hear my accent. I'm Jamaican by birth. And I bring that up because people often ask me, as a black female immigrant, why do you continue to work with law enforcement? And I say, because I'm hopeful. I know that change is possible, and if not now, when? So I'm driven by that desire for change to happen. And I'm coming back to both Andrew and Nala. What drives you? Why do you continue this work?
Yeah, I can start us off. Like you said, kind of like being a black woman who comes from, a city that has been hit a lot by, mass incarceration, the effects of policing. That's what drives me, having those experiences, that fear that, I don't want other black little girls and little boys to, fear police the way I have, or to see some of the things that I have seen. And so those instances, those experiences, those negative experiences that I've had is really what drives me to have these conversations, to sit in these rooms, with people like Chief and Lewis, to really kind of get the ball cranking on things. And like you said, if not when, and if not who, why not me?
Yeah, what drives me is just wanting to be a part of the solution. We know that there are issues there, and I've had a great role model in my father, like I said, who was a police officer, and being that he was one of few within his department as a black man, he made sure to be the conduit from the department within the community as well. Not always being successful on either end, but he always persisted in doing so. So growing up in a household where with someone who was just looking to be a part of the change and drive the change, it definitely has rubbed off on me, which is one of my motivating factors.
Thank you both. And Chief, I'm coming to you at this point. And I think I never hide how appreciative I am of Chief Roman, because she's always thinking ahead. She's always standing up for what's right. UWPD has done amazing work over the last few years. In 2017, you started the PAC. In 2019, you created a first of its kind diversity and inclusion officer. And in many instances, this is a buzzword in some departments. I think you were ahead of the game with everything that we experienced over the last 2 years. And you're also going to show at some point today a racial equity dashboard that was created. These are all innovations which you're not seeing in a typical department across the country. And I think that's something to be encouraged, that's something to be celebrated. So I'd love, Chief, for you to talk, one, about the creation of the PAC and the goal behind that, and then also about the creation of a diversity and inclusion officer, and what was your thinking behind that. And when Chief is done, Dr. Macias, I'd love for you to come in and share more about your position and how you think your position can help to bridge this gap to rebuild relationships.
Sure, well, thank you. So the Police Advisory Council, I'll start with that. When I started back in 2017, again, having come from the city of Madison, when I left the city, I was serving as their first ever community outreach captain. And that position was something that really was a culmination of a lot of the initiatives and efforts and work that I had really been involved in throughout my career. And we, at that time, in the aftermath of the shooting of Tony Robinson and a number of other national incidents that we're all aware of, I saw a real opportunity coming into this position and with this department to build on that community engagement that was already in place and to really implement a formal mechanism for consistent and ongoing engagement with our community. And I wanted that to be a body that was as representative as possible of the diversity across campus. Now, being new to campus and the landscape here, when I started in 2017, obviously I had a lot to learn, and I didn't know a lot of the different key stakeholders and how they would work with the police department. And so I turned to the community relations director here on campus and asked for some assistance in pulling together a planning group to help me, to point me in the right directions of who to try to enlist to be a part of this council. And so early on, I met actually Louis and Ida here, who were a part of my planning group back in 2017 to put this Police Advisory Council together. And again, the idea was to be able to share information, to enlist feedback and input, to have regular conversation and again have community access directly to me as chief of the department, but also to bring in others from within the department to meet community members. And so we spent the first couple of years, a lot of the work that we were doing then was really just getting familiar and educating the community members that were participating in that council of the different services that UWPD provides. But also during that time, we enlisted the group to guide us on some policy development. We were looking to add language in our some immigration language to our policy in our limits of authority policy. And so they helped us develop that. They helped us evaluate some equipment for the uniforms to kind of gauge impact. And so those are some of the early things that group was plugged into. And it's evolved, and we've grown, and we've certainly added members and really rolled up our sleeves and done some excellent work this past year, which you'll hear about in a little bit. As far as Louis's position, again, I had a couple of years to get to know him as a member of the Police Advisory Council. And one day I was actually at a meeting somewhere on campus, and recruitment is a big challenge for police departments. And it's not a new problem. It's an old problem, but obviously it's been made far more challenging given the circumstances of the last year and a half after the murder of George Floyd, the protests, but also the pandemic has made it hard for everybody. And so a few years ago, I was looking at how do I really set about diversifying our ranks, our sworn ranks in particular. And I was at a meeting on campus, and there was an announcement of a new position that was being created, an associate dean position within the School of Education, I believe. And it was a diversity, equity, and inclusion position. And I had this aha moment sitting there thinking, why can't we do something like that in a police department? I know it's not been done. Usually recruiting is handled by a sworn personnel. I was actually the first recruiting officer for the Madison Police Department way back when. And so I started thinking about the potential there to bring in somebody who is trained in this, who understands diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and who has a history of building programs and recruiting diverse and qualified applicants to the campus. And so I tossed the idea out at a Police Advisory Council meeting, and these two right away sort of said, hey, let's have lunch. And we started talking separately. They didn't even know they had reached out to me independently. And so we had conversations to start to put this position together. And I'm fortunate that Dr. Macias, I call him Louis, was able to help us shape this position out. And like I said, that was back in 2019. And he's done some incredible work revising our hiring process, streamlining that. We've had some great successes in terms of the goals we set out to diversify to some degree. We have much more work to do in that regard. But I'll let him tell you a little bit more about the impact that he's been having.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. And I do call you Chief. I'll just keep calling you Chief. Yeah, I mean, there's the background, and something I want to allude to that Nikki, you mentioned was, DEI work, and those of you that do that work in the audience and who are watching know that it's incredibly complex. It's incredibly intense when it comes to just energy that you have to bring, and a lot of that self-work that goes into it, sort of the self-preservation work as well as the reflection work, right, that goes into continuing to grow. I'm often asked, like you, Nikki, Dr. Nikki, that, what it's, as a person of color, why make that choice too? And for me, I think it really speaks to sort of what my approach to the position has been is like any DEI leader, I'm a firm believer that we only grow through closeness and through dissonance, right? Through confronting the realities that challenge our ways of thinking, right? That allow us to grow and allow us to evolve as people and as a community. And to me, I think that's a fundamental driver for why. And your note about optimism is so much at the core. The most optimistic people in any organization are typically your DEI folks, right? Which is ironic in some ways, but it's how you get the work. It's what keeps you going, right? Because if we're sort of confronted with the heaviness of all of this every day and we sit in that too long, it's debilitating, right? There's not a way to really overcome that. And so at the department, I see myself as playing two roles as a DEI leader. And the first is a questioner, right? Having us as staff and as colleagues within the department confronting questions that are difficult, questions that perhaps we haven't considered before, questions that perhaps we have, but not in the same way. But then I also see myself, and this is where the value and how appreciative I am of folks like Ida and Nala and Andrew, of doing that in the community as well, right? Of being around our officers every day and seeing how much folks care, seeing how dedicated our staff, non-sworn and sworn in the department, are to all the things you see in a career day in elementary school, right? Where a police officer comes in and there's sort of this magic about that job and protecting people and helping people. Incidentally, as educators, it's the reason why a lot of us are in the profession, right? And so for me, it's about how can I create that proximity between these two groups that in many ways, what I've seen over 3 years in my role, there's a lot more commonality than I think we realize in a lot of ways. We're actually saying a lot of the same things. I think the barrier is sort of this second piece, which is the emotion. There's so much emotion to get through, and I think everyone that shared stuff on this is spot on, that we have to acknowledge that. We have to confront that emotion first. Because ultimately, if we don't, then we're going to get stalled at the conversation. We're going to get stalled at the discussion, and we're not going to get to where we've had the great fortune of getting to with our Police Advisory Council, which is an equity dashboard, which is figuring out the how. And that's what I see as the second and ultimately the most important role of a Chief Diversity Officer is results, right? Are we actually changing things in measurable ways that are for the betterment of the communities that we serve, right? And by extension, the communities that they serve. I see that as a really core function, and so in that spirit, like Chief said, we've done a lot of exciting things over the course of a few years, but really, really excited to be sharing the equity dashboard with you all today. So it's coming here in a few minutes.
And I'm really excited for you to see it because it is something to see. We spoke earlier about the uniqueness of a campus, of a university campus, really it being a microcosm of the larger society. So we're seeing a lot of good concentrated in one place, but we're also seeing a lot of social ill concentrated in one place as well. And we know on a university campus, there are concerns about increase in mental health issues, substance use issues. There are concerns about excessive alcohol use. There are concerns about sexual violence and others. And these are some things that law enforcement, police are oftentimes called to deal with. And there's often the question of whether or not police should be involved in these spaces. Ida, I know that a part of your passion and what drives you really is the ability to help make meaningful connections with students on campus. It's really about being a part of their lives, and you've been on the campus for some 20 years, and you're a member of the PAC. I wanted to ask you, how do you connect your work to the role on the PAC? And then what role do you think the police should play in these situations?
Thanks for the question, Nikki. So I think about this in two ways. So the first way has to do with crisis response, as you mentioned, which for me really relates to health and wellness for students and other members of our campus community. And the other piece is transparency of process, in particular, how it relates to social and racial justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Over the years, I've worked in as a sexual health counselor here at University Health Services. I've worked in scholarship programs and direct, contact with students, and I've worked in the Dean of Students office. And during that time, some of the most challenging experiences that require, those of us who work, closely with students have to do with crisis response. And so, I've had a lot of conversations over the years with both students that I've interacted with and with colleagues who are trying to support those students in crisis about the best ways to support them, especially when, police need to be involved because it's the only way that we've had in the past to, make sure that they are safe, that they're getting the care that they need. And given the larger societal, issues that, that our lives are embedded in, it's complicated, right? Like what Nala said, like depending on where students come from, their experiences with who is, perceived to come in and help them in situations like that varies widely depending on who you are. And so I spent a lot of time working, in close with my colleagues and with students who were in crisis, having conversations with them, trying to figure out ways to support them to get them the help that they needed. And so when the opportunity came along for me to, be a part of a group who was shifting this conversation and this narrative in the way that Chief wanted to do, I definitely wanted to step up to do that, to use my experiences, the stories that students have shared with me, or the literally like direct conversations that I've had with students, or me having to take a student to a hospital, or be there for them because otherwise, they wouldn't have gone. We needed to have a different conversation, so I wanted to be part of that. The other piece was, as an academic staff member on campus, being able to be connected to a lot of different places and colleagues who are also supporting students, and being able to bring back conversations that I've had with them, people who work in schools and colleges, people who work all over campus, with, pre-college students, undergraduate students and graduate students, like at all levels, and being able to bring that, to the Police Advisory Council and have a transparency and say, hey, like you're doing X, Y, and Z. I guarantee you these folks don't know about it because I was just at a meeting there and they didn't know, right? And so part of what I see my role as is utilizing the networks that I have built over that 20 years, both as a student and as a staff member, to really push, the connection forward and to, help them with their work related to, being more transparent. As somebody who works in, the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as a queer woman of color, I still have that work to do. So if I expect myself to do that, I expect that of everybody else, right? So it's all of our work. And so if I want that to change, if I want to be a part of that, then I had to kind of like step into that, space to do it. So that's kind of how that part connects with me. Nikki, you asked me a second question that I cannot remember. Did I get it?
What is the role of policing in all this, which you kind of mentioned some of
I'm
it.
going to add just a little bit to it. I think it's so much more complicated to even ask, like, what is the role of policing, right? I think the question is, what is the role that we all have to support students, which goes back to what Chief said earlier about how the things that they do intentionally that are so significantly different than most, not just all police departments, absolutely, but also campus police departments, that the work that they're doing and the way that they see themselves as people who support the academic endeavors of this university and the health and safety of all of us is really important, because it's a different viewpoint that allows for growth, it allows for transparency, and it allows for connection. And so I would say the role that UWPD has is so much broader than what we think of as policing. And I think that that's what I want people to really recognize or ask more questions about, and go to the website, interact with all of us, and let us know what are some more ways we can do that, because we want to support it.
That's an excellent point. So the title of our session is about changing the narrative of policing, but also exploring intentional ways to collaborate for health and safety issues. Chief, I'd love for you to talk about some of your intentional efforts that you have in the police department. Again, recognizing how much further ahead you are compared to other agencies across the country.
So I'm still sort of taking in all of the things that Ida just shared, and one of the things that really resonated for me was her comment about all of us need to be doing this work. I have always seen my role in policing from the time I was an officer on the street all the way through the various ranks and assignments, and even as chief currently. I've always seen the necessity of collaboration, and so all of our initiatives, I think, are really centered around this idea that we need each other in order to be well as a community and to be safe. Like, to be well means you have to be safe, and that's where we come in terms of taking the lead, but we certainly can't do that by ourselves. And so some of the collaborative, I think, approaches and initiatives, ways that we try to engage with our community to promote safety and well-being are programs like, we talked about mental health. So right now we're piloting a co-responder program with UHS and the mental health services folks there. And right now our focus, obviously, in partnering with MHS is students, is how we respond together when we can to mental health crises or concerns involving students. Now, students are only a portion of the community that we serve, obviously, and a lot of the calls that we're responding to when it comes to things like mental health crises don't actually involve students. And we also have a lot of community members from Madison that have no affiliation with the UW campus itself who come onto campus, and our officers are engaging with those folks as well. And so we're always looking for ways to partner to find solutions for the various things that we're dealing with. Now, police, whether it's on campus or in the community, we respond to symptoms of deeper problems, of ills. And so that's why we really do need to come together to problem solve these challenges. I think there will always be a role for police in these situations, like mental health is one example. We partner with the Dean of Students Office and student conduct around addressing alcohol when it becomes a medical concern. So our amnesty program is one way that we try to work together with student affairs. But they're with us on football game days. We were out for Halloween this weekend partnering with some Dean of Students, and I were out, and our partner over at Housing was out with us as well. Our officers are in the res halls as liaison officers. They do educational programming within the res halls. We have community officers who are dedicated to specific areas within campus, and that's their focus, is that community. We have one here today. If you want to raise your hand, there's Bear. If you don't know Bear, ask him some questions afterwards. He's been great in this role. So those are just some of the ways I think that we partner. The list goes on, though.
And I really appreciate you sharing that, because again, quite often, we are not aware of what exactly the police is doing on a day-to-day basis. And it's important to understand this level of involvement, this level of partnership, which we heard, this level of collaboration. I often, when I go into jurisdictions, I question and I push folks to question the definition of public safety. We unfortunately have defined it by an absence of crime, but it should be so much more. Nala mentioned earlier the fear that people have. A reduction of fear should also be a part of public safety. So I'll challenge you all to really dig deeper into what that could potentially mean for the UW campus. Nala and Andrea, students on campus, you just heard what Chief and Ida said. What more do you think is needed for this co-production of public safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think just continuing the work that's being done, continue acknowledging the national narrative, continue the engagement with the community, with transparency, showing the initiatives that the department is doing, and also it's a two-way street, so listening to the community's needs as well. So yeah, those two areas, acknowledgement and continuous engagement.
Yeah, this is something I've also said in like one of our PAC meetings, is that I think the intention in building community and the acknowledgement, like all that has to be very, very loud. And I think, a lot of times we often look at the work as, very quiet, it's done behind the scenes, right? But I think when it comes to building relationships and kind of, bridging that gap between police and communities of color, like that, the intention, it has to be there, and it has to be loud, right? Like really tap into, student organizations and really talk to student leaders and really see what their needs are, what their fears are. I think that's very important to know as well is, why do you fear us? Why do we fear you? And have those conversations. And yeah, I think it's just the personable part of it, the empathy, the really like knowing faces, knowing who people are, knowing their backgrounds, in order to bridge those gaps.
So it's really about understanding and knowing each other's story, understanding and knowing each other's history. I've also encouraged where I am currently working for us to have listening sessions because it's on both sides. How do we understand the daily lives of law enforcement officers, of police officers, and how do we understand the daily lives of community members? So I think that's really important. Dr. Macias, I'm coming to you with this same question. What more is needed? And I'll prepare the rest of the panel for your final thoughts in a second. I'll come to you for your final thoughts. But what more is needed in terms of really creating an atmosphere of the co-production of public safety?
Yeah, no, I think certainly, and you touched on it and our other panelists did as well, when it comes to empathy, right? I think absolutely empathy is something, I think certainly not just when we think about policing, but as a society that we're really lacking right now, that we need a lot of help with. The other piece of that maybe doesn't get taught too much or talked about as much is humility. I think a lot of us, particularly those that care about this stuff the most, right, or to a great degree are really passionate about it, I think show up in ways that presume answers, right? And the reality is this stuff is extremely complex. It really is. When I talk about my work, I'm not talking about my work in the context of policing as a whole, right? It would be great hubris for me to suggest that somehow I fundamentally changed the fabric of policing by being a CDO at a single department, right? I think that reminds me of the reality that all of us need to remain curious. We need to continue asking questions, and it's really tempting, right? I think all of us confront that difficulty to show up to these conversations with all the answers, right? That we sort of have the magic bullet in hand, that we know how to do it. I think at the end of the day, all of us are doing the best we can, and all of us need to commit to continue doing the best we can, because that's literally all we can do, right, as individuals and as a collective community. So that humility piece, I think, is huge. Ego is a big part of what gets in the way.
Ego is a huge part of what gets in the way, and I won't get into that because that's a whole other session. You mentioned curiosity, and I taught a class the other day with some students, and I pushed them also, and I'll push you to make sure it's an informed curiosity. And I often say to law enforcement agencies, if you don't tell your story, someone else will tell your story. And the unfortunate thing is bad news sells. And we've experienced that, and with social media, someone else is going to tell your story. What you have here at the UWPD is something really unique, I think, and something that should be heard more and should be discussed more with your PAC, with your students. I'll really encourage that. I'll come to each of you for any final thoughts you have before we turn over to Dr. Macias for the lovely demonstration that he'll give shortly. Ida?
With me. I know you warned us, but honestly, Lewis stole a little bit of my thunder there. One of the things that I tell people all of the time, when you're doing any kind of, personal work related to diversity, equity, inclusion, racial and social justice, is that curiosity. For me, a relentless curiosity to ask questions. If you don't know something, asking, and not just assuming that, because you had a particular experience or folks that you've interacted with have had a particular experience, that it applies to the work that is being done here. Because I think that it's really important to ask those questions, if you are able to be in a space to do that. Because depending on your identities, your experiences, what is going on in the moment, nationally, locally, you might not be ready for particular conversations. But that part I think is really important, I just want to reiterate that part, and knowing more about our campus. And so for folks watching, here in the audience and online, I'm going to make a plug for that campus climate survey. I know they said 20% was good. I want it to be higher. I want to know more about our student experiences, so push it out so that we can use that to help our students be well.
I'll give the rest of the panel 30 more seconds to think about your final thoughts. And just a reminder that we are going to have a question and answer period after. So please do send along your questions either in the chat, and we'll get those questions answered as much as is possible today. Chief, your final thoughts?
So I'll close with two things. One, with a feeling of gratitude for this opportunity, for the fact that you all came here today to have this conversation with us, and for the folks sitting here, as I said at the outset, who have been supportive, have pushed back when they've felt the need to do that, and have been instrumental in helping us continue to reach higher. And second thing I'll say, I'll close with an invitation to anybody in this room, to those who may be listening, to those who you could invite by extension. Building on Lewis's comment about curiosity, I invite you to ask the questions. We welcome those questions. We invite you to engage with us, to learn more about us, but mostly to give us feedback that is constructive, that we can use, again, to continue to assess and to evolve and to improve, so that we can provide the best service possible to our community. That's why we do this. So I invite you to ask the questions, to provide the feedback whenever you have those opportunities, to come visit us, to go on ride-alongs, to learn more about your police department, because the men and women who comprise this department really are remarkable human beings. They're human beings, and they're here to serve all of you. So I hope you take me up on that invitation.
And Dr. Macias, and just before you speak, if you see me on my cell phone, I'm not distracted. Modern technology and COVID, I'm getting the questions text to me. So just to let you know. Dr. Macias?
I'm glad. I would have been very offended, Dr. Nikki. No, I think, Chief, in the spirit of stealing thunder, she stole mine about gratitude. Certainly last summer, even early fall, really through the end of last year, the idea that this would all be a thing just felt a bit like a pipe dream, right? Just given where we were and just how unlikely it felt to get to the point that we're all talking about, right, that we need to get to. And so I'm grateful to my colleagues here on the stage for their investment and their energy and their time in this process that we've underwent over the last year. I'm grateful to you all for being here and listening and engaging. I really do appreciate that, and everyone listening. And so thank you. I think, again, in the spirit of optimism and hope, this is one of those moments that I'll put in the bank. So thank you.
Nala?
Yeah, I just want to say that, as a, someone who is a student leader, someone who's, ran student organizations and have done a lot of work on campus, I always say that at the end of the day, I'm still a Black person. You know, I'm still a person of color who has had experiences with police and negative experiences at that. And so sometimes it's often very hard to be in these spaces. It's often hard to have these conversations, but I want to stress the fact that it's so important. It's so important for us to be in these spaces and to have our voice heard and to really, you know, say what we want to say and be allowed to feel how we feel, but at the end of the day, get the work done, because it can't just be us. It can't just be communities of color to fix it, right? It can't just be on the police to fix it as well, right? We have to be hand in hand, and so in order to do that, we have to be in these spaces and we have to have these conversations. So I'm very grateful for you all for allowing me to be in these spaces, allowing me to have these conversations, and seeing the work that's being done. It truly does make me hopeful as well.
Mr. Andrew?
All right, I don't know how I'm going to follow up everyone else's speech. So much pressure. No, just to echo what everyone else is saying, keep the conversation going is the goal, to ensure that the community is being best served, right? And everyone within the community, and empathy, practicing empathy on both sides, and that informed curiosity. I like that term, on both sides, because from the community, like if you're feeling as though you're not being served, then yes, let's take action and participate and agitate as well, right? And become part of that conversation. So yeah, just once again, close things out with another invitation to take action and be part of that change that you want to see.
Thank you all so much. Of course, it's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here and be a part of this panel. We're going to have a demonstration now for the Racial Equity Dashboard. Just a reminder, as Dr. Macias gets ready to do this, please do send questions in. We've gotten a lot of wonderful questions. We might not get to all your questions, and if we do not, I encourage you to follow up with members of the panel or the chief.
Thank you, Dr. Nikki. And so, again, in the spirit of informed curiosity and a lot of the themes that we've talked about, right? We wanted, I think a lot of times when we talk about this, keep the conversation going, let's talk, let's engage. These are sort of very general words, and a lot of times it's important for us to root those in something that's tangible, right? And something that we can actually point to that's sort of one for one. And so last June, we launched our Racial Equity Initiative. So this was right following the murder of George Floyd, and I think in the department, like many of us, there was sort of this very visceral response to what had happened, and really wanted to do something different, particularly because we're a police department, than a lot of the things we were seeing, right? A lot of folks remember Burger King. Everyone had a statement. Burger King had a statement, like all this sort of stuff. We wanted to do something more than that. And certainly the words of affirmation and acknowledging some things, that is absolutely important. That's something we did through our Racial Equity Initiative announcement. But we also wanted to take action, right? We also wanted something that would move some of these goals forward, right? And so in the spirit of informed accountability, when we think about data transparency, data reporting, data dashboards, police sharing that type of information, that's nothing new. But I think something when we talk about data, and we talk particularly about DEI data, that is a gap area for not just policing, but a lot of institutions, is that we don't define equity the same way, right? You could sample any number of people in a community, and you're potentially going to get all kinds of different characterizations of what equity means, right? What does that mean measurably? Well, what happens is when we don't have that alignment, we miss each other, right? Wires get crossed, and that is going to continue to break down that sense of engagement, that sense of community, that sense of credibility, right, in an institution. And so, as you can see here, over the last year, really worked with our folks up here and others. It was a group of about 20 to 25 people, all in all, from all around the university, to really answer that question. If your police department is practicing equitably, what does that look like, right? What are the metrics for that would show that in a way that is aligned with our community? It's not the police department deciding what constitutes equity or how equity is defined. It is the police department in concert with the community that we serve creating that definition. And so I'm not going to be able to go through all of this with you all, but I do want to preface this by saying you're going to see some data up here, some numbers. I'm not even going to call it data. You're going to see some numbers. All of this is a prototype. This is actually going to launch on November 15th, so stay tuned. There's going to be a lot more information about this that we push out in a variety of channels. But all the data that you see here, all the numbers that you see here are all sort of placeholders. So none of it is real or anything like that. So very, very important clarification before we move forward. And so what you see here is sort of, there's other sections to the dashboard, but I'm just going to focus on this one, which is the more quantitative section, numbers-oriented section. So that red bar that you see there is sort of the different categories that in sort of these conversations were illuminated as categories where we could really tell an equity-centered story, right? And the extent, again, to which the department is aligning with that or not aligning with that. And so hopefully you're starting to see that this really can be a tool not only for our community, but also a tool for our department. And in fact, in its development process, when we think about data collection, when we think about a number of other things that we've been doing, it has proven really valuable already. So I'm really, really excited. We are really, really excited to see the value that this continues to bring. But how does it work generally? So each tab that you see here has a similar visualization. Data is going to be tracked on a quarterly basis. So in a current year, you're going to be able to see any sort of combination of quarters in the current year. You're also going to be able to see previous years. And it's going to bring up a similar visualization. That visualization is going to have these primary filters that you're going to see, which include gender, race, race ethnicity, UW affiliation, age, right? So these demographic filters that you're going to have available as a community member. Then, depending on the category, you're going to have these secondary filters. So for example, in the case of traffic stops, you're going to have enforcement outcome. So was the outcome of that traffic stop, was it a verbal warning? Was it a citation? These types of things, the reason for the stop. Right? What prompted the stop? And so hopefully and those are also filterable. So hopefully what you're seeing and starting to think about, if you haven't already, is that you could, in the spirit of informed curiosity, you could ask any number of questions, right? And figure out, okay, is there a disparate impact? Are there trends where like we've seen in other places, and these are the conversations that we were having as a PAC, are people of color overrepresented, for example, in the rates at which they receive a citation during a traffic stop as opposed to a verbal warning, right? Very tangible, equity-related question that we could ask that relates to enforcement. And so we're going to have that available with any number of these things. So citations, criminal arrests, use of force, complaints. Importantly, this overview tab is going to provide a context and a basis for you all as our community members to really be doing that comparison. So if African Americans, for example, represent 5% of our arrests in a given quarter, right? What does that mean out of context, right? We're not sure, right? That depends on the community that sort of all of that is happening in. So we're going to have UW-Madison demographic data available as a comparison point. We're going to have City of Madison. Chief mentioned that a lot of our contacts are with folks who aren't necessarily affiliated with the university, so we want to be able to provide that context as well. And then also, during that, giving a sense of the number of contacts, right? The number of calls for service that our officers are responding to really provide that sort of universe in which traffic stops, citations, use of force, any of these sort of broader categories are happening in. And so, again, I think it's really exciting opportunity, again, in the spirit of informed curiosity, for us to be thinking about, wow, like we're going to really be able to dig in and ask very specific questions. We talk about disaggregated data and the importance of that, right? We're going to be able to ask it in all these areas. And so again, in thinking about how we got here, how we landed on these, that's the work of these good people up here, right? Both the folks with badges and the folks without them. Really engaging in that conversation and answering that question. And it was complex, right? It was certainly a winding process. But we're really, really excited. And so this is just a taste. This is just a preview. But again, it's going to be released on November 15th. There will be a ton of stuff on our website, social media. We're really trying to get this far and wide. So we'll have an annual review of this as well. So definitely, please reach out. Would love to hear from you if folks have feedback, reactions, whatever it may be to this.
Louis?
Yeah.
Would you mind, just because this is the first, broader public reveal, a little bit about the limitations of our categories in terms of gender?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Chief. And so, yeah, we've been asked this question, and this is a prototype sort of visualization. With gender, a lot of folks, and rightfully so, have asked, and we did throughout our initial, our process, we were like, absolutely got to get to non-binary categories, being able to track that sort of information. The problem, and this really illuminates, and I think it's the value of having the community members. I think we all we're learning together on this of this is an example of systems operating within systems, right? Where the way we source that data is through driver's licenses, right? And the state currently has male and female as the only options that we can use. And so other states, hopefully, right, Minnesota, Illinois, some of these other states are now starting to expand the categories that they are using. I think Chief and I have talked about this. The minute that they do that, hopefully, fingers crossed, in Wisconsin, we would absolutely not only start collecting data in that way, but certainly reporting data in that way. And so that's something that'll be noted on our final version. That's some feedback that we've gotten early on. So thank you, Chief, for asking that.
And the only other thing I will say is that we are prepared, obviously, or we wouldn't have undertaken this initiative, for this to point us to areas that we do need to address. And so while there may be some initial criticism potentially, as I would anticipate, if the numbers, and we have not yet seen the data fully filled out for this dashboard yet, so we'll have a chance to take a look at that. And part of why we wanted to do this is not so that we could say, hey, look, everybody, we're totally on the mark. We may be off the mark. And so that's, again, I reissue the invitation to help us explore the reasons why that is. There could be a number of different reasons why we might be off the mark. And so we want to ask those questions. We want to do it in concert with our community, and then we want to respond to those in ways that help us improve.
Thank you. So we'll move on to Q&A.
Thank you, Louis.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
This is on behalf of Clifford Owensby, Dayton, Ohio. He was paraplegic and he was pulled out by the officers, and he has repeated the request. He wanted to call somebody to help him out. And as a person with cerebral palsy, I personally can say I've been stopped once in Colorado, and I've told the officer, for some reason, he thought I was drunk or something. I told the officer I can't walk a straight line, and he didn't really believe me, which is in a way a given for people with cerebral palsy. They don't have any balance. So there's no way I could ever walk a straight line when I was 2 years old or at the age I am right now. So I guess my question is do you feel there's enough training for the officers about disabled people? And what could Clifford have done differently than what he did? Because that way I kind of can learn from that, so I know what to do if I ever get stopped again, and I gotta ask if I'm drunk or not. And like me personally, I did tell the officer, I was cerebral palsy, I can't walk a straight line, and he didn't understand.
Thank you for your question. Chief, do you want to take that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm sorry that for your experience. I am not very familiar with the case that you're pointing to. I haven't done a lot of kind of looking into the facts around that. But from what you've said, it points to me to a training issue for sure, a lack of understanding. There's a lot of additional training that is always evolving for officers. When I first started, we didn't have training that, for instance, pointed to how to engage with people with autism. We're seeing a lot more of training that's emerging around those kinds of vulnerable populations. And so just knowing what you've told me, I would say that would point to a training issue. I don't think that is something that you or this other individual could have done any more about in terms of communicating with the officers what the challenges were, what the situation was. So I'm sorry that was your experience. Right, at the time, you're right. At the time, my suggestion would be at the time, in what you've described, to continue until you have the opportunity to come back and file a complaint or file, inquiry into the circumstances that unfolded there. So,
Luckily, I never got arrested or anything, but I could see my situation getting worse depending on the officer, because it's on the officer's discretion. So
Right.
I could see what happened in Ohio happening to me.
yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I appreciate that, and we can connect afterwards and maybe talk about this a little bit more. I want to make sure we have time for some of the other questions, but thank you for that.
And I was just going to suggest that as well. And I really thank you for sharing that story. And really, truly, I'm sorry that you experienced this. I think what's important as well is that we continue to share these stories so that we can learn from each other and make the necessary changes. Chief, let me just warn you, a lot of the questions are directed to you. For me, this past year has been a lot of finding my why. Reevaluating the impact I want to make in life and to whom. Chief Roman, what is your why? And how has it shifted over the years?
Wow. Can I take this one home and write and take a walk in the woods, think about it a little bit? My why changes, I think, every day. It's slightly different. I don't know that there's one why. And sometimes the why that I ask myself is why, right? It comes out differently than, oh, this is why. And so I guess if I had to reduce that in this moment, the why for me is really about wanting, and this sounds so cliche when you say it, but I really just want to make a positive impact on the lives of others. And I would add to that, in particular, in the lives of those who perhaps aren't in a position in the moment, for whatever reason, to necessarily, defend themselves is not the word, but to advocate for themselves in the ways that we all should be able to have people on our side to help us do that. So, sounds a little cliche, but I guess that would be the why, to help people, to make a difference for the better. And what was the other part of that? The why and the...
That was it.
That was it. Okay. Whoever asked that, come get me afterwards, because I'd love to tell you tomorrow what my answer is.
And that's a sign of an overachiever, asking what else was there. I'll give her a break because all the questions really are directed to her, but I'm changing a bit. Ida, what advice would you give to someone to encourage them to call the police when they're in a vulnerable situation? And a follow-up question to that is, how do we teach the next generation to trust the police?
Oh, you had the easy question.
Oh no, she has
That
a
was
few
mine.
hard
She
ones
just
coming.
gave it to you.
Oh, yeah, that's what I think. Gosh, I think that this is something that I've shared with students that I've worked with in the past, when literally I've had students call me, and they shouldn't have been calling me. They probably should have been calling 911, because there was literally a legit emergency that I probably could not have been helping with. Is that, you have to know who your systems of support are. And sometimes those systems of support can help you in those particular instances, right? And so I think it's so complicated, because if you're talking about an immediate concern, right, something related to somebody's life, to their health and wellness and safety, you have to make a decision, in a very quick moment. And, we do have 911 systems, in place to help, for people who are trained for actual crisis, right? If there is a medical crisis, please call 911, even though I know that, if you call your friend and they don't know what they're doing, that's not going to be helpful, right? So there's that piece, and creating systems of support, right? Know what your resources are. Here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we are not resource lacking. We're just not. And it's really, really important that students understand the resources that they have. And if you're not sure about it, ask people, ask your advisors, right? Ask, like go to the Dean of Students website, go to the Student Affairs website, go ask, places where you feel comfortable, because I think that that's really important to helping, break down some of those barriers, because you might meet people like me, right? Or meet students, like Nala and Andrew, who might know, other resources for you. So I would say there is that. And again, I'm forgetting the second question.
And that's perfectly fine. I'll move on to the next
Okay.
question. And this is a good segue into this question. Chief, can you talk about the newly created UWPD and UHS co-responder mental health crisis response program? Why are armed police still involved in this response? Why do police need to be involved in mental health responses at all?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to work backwards on that, and I'll start with why police will be involved. I think to undertake a process of discerning which situations can actually be 100% diverted from police is great, and let's do it. We welcome that, and as long as there's somebody who's got that, then we're happy to hand that off. That's something that police, at the fore in many circles, have been asking for a very, very long time. So that's number one. That said, even in a perfect system, not a perfect system because there is no such thing, but even in a system where we do have another lead for responding to mental health crises, there's always going to be somebody who falls through the cracks. That's just the nature of the beast. And so when things fall through the cracks, the system that we have in place currently for all things is police, 24/7 response to the issues facing our society when people fall through the cracks, and it runs the gamut, right? And so when it comes to mental health crises, even in those situations where, let's say, we're only responding to one crisis a month instead of one a day here on campus, for instance, that's still one individual that needs our assistance, and we need to be adequately trained and prepared to respond to that individual. So the number of crises might diminish in terms of how many times police would be involved in that situation. And there are a number of situations, I just pointed to a couple, and I hear from our mental health partners, where the dangerousness that's exhibited is at the level where most people who are mental health professionals would not be comfortable entering into that situation alone. And so that's where these co-responder models come in, where you have more resources to bring to bear on any given situation, and depending on what's needed, one or the other can take the lead and the other can step back. And so currently the program that we're piloting is just that. It's limited right now in scope because we're waiting to assess and to build up some resources for it. But currently during certain hours of the day, during the week, when there's a situation involving a mental health crisis involving a student, we will do some triaging of that situation, and then we will send an officer and a mental health responder from MHS to go together into that situation. Again, if there are certain situations that are volatile, those tend to be more rare. A lot of misperceptions about mental illness and dangerousness and violence, and we know that, and we certainly don't want to perpetuate that, but there are some of those. And in those situations, oftentimes the best tool to bring to bear is going to be somebody like the police. Unless and until there's another entity that is stood up in our communities to take that on. And again, I think as police officers, we would welcome any of those additional supports and layers of service to help us navigate these really complex situations. And we do that by training our officers, and Nikki knows this because we've worked together for years on these issues, and these collaborative responses are all about diverting people with mental illness or mental health challenges from a criminal justice system and into the mental health system, which is still in need of a lot of work. Both systems are, but you get what I'm saying.
Thank you so much, Chief. We are at time. There were other questions that we would really love to get to, but it's just not possible at this time. We want to thank you for being here. We want to thank you for sharing in this session. And I will continue to encourage you to reach out, to ask questions, to continue to push the narrative, to continue to push the status quo, because change is possible. So thank you again for your time. Enjoy the rest of your sessions today and have a good day and be safe.